Welcome, everyone, to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host, and welcome to our brand new segment, Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim. And with me for this, I guess, limited series segment is Alex Kane. Welcome, Alex.
Hey, what's up, everybody? Thanks for having me.
I'm super excited to cover The Mandalorian.
Yes. It feels like... we spent 14 years or something waiting on George Lucas to make a live-action TV series, and Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni finally got around to doing it for him, so it's pretty crazy.
It's crazy times that we finally have this TV show that I have, literally wanted since I was in high school.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel so old now. I just wanted to do a quick introduction to what the show is going to be about, a little bit about kind of what you can hear from us, and then we'll dig into everything. So this show is going to look at the Mandalorian show that is available on Disney Plus from a connotative and genre and mythic lens perspective. And so that's why we named it Once Upon a Time in the Outer Rim. It kind of follows both that Western genre feel that we know kind of permeates the whole thing, as well as the standard lens that I view Star Wars from, which is a mythic and sort of fairy tale perspective. So I really, really hope that you enjoy this segment. And Alex, did you have anything to say before we kind of dig in?
Not really. I guess that, I'm sort of a newcomer to myth in some ways, in the sense that, you've kind of been talking about it in other podcasts and looking at things through Campbell and Robert Bly. So I sort of come to this more as a journalist who asks questions about the how and the what. And so it's interesting to come into something where, you're sort of expert at getting to the why of things. And so hopefully, the chemistry there will make for some interesting conversations.
I'm hoping that we both learn a lot from our conversation and discussion, and I hope that the audience and all you listeners come along for the journey. I remember when I first heard all about this, I was just so excited. And when I attended the celebration panel in Chicago, and Jon Favreau mentioned that Dave Filoni had put him through Jedi boot camp and he was now his Padawan, and he was forced to read the hero's journey and understand it, I screamed. I was the only Joseph Campbell fan apparently in the audience. And Ty smacked me, Ty Black, who's an occasional co-host on the show too. And I felt a little embarrassed for screaming, but to me, it's so exciting to hear that this show is going to align to those things. And just as a reminder, before we get started, just make sure to, if you're not already subscribed, make sure to subscribe on any apps so you can see when these episodes come out, as well as all of our regular What the Force episodes, just because we're going to try to release these as soon as we're capable of recording and having them come out. So this should be so much fun. Just as a quick reminder, we're going to be digging in full spoilers, but with a mythic lens. So it should be a really, really interesting discussion. So, Alex, Chapter 1.
Chapter 1. Okay, so the episode begins on a snowy, desolate world where the Mandalorian arrives to capture a bounty, a blue-skinned fish man called a Mythrol. This is 8 years after the Battle of Endor. We get some of the very traditional Western tropes here. Strong silent type, the outsider, accusations of spilling another guy's drink, lots of machismo and testosterone. The Mandalorian escorts the fish man on board his ship, the Razor Crest, and takes off. But not before they hitch a ride with a land speeder driven by comedian Brian Posehn, of all people. Once in space, we learn that the Mandalorian doesn't say much, and certainly not to his targets. The Mythrol makes an attempt to escape by claiming to need to use the restroom. The Mandalorian tosses him into a carbonite slab, freezes him for storage, puts him in along with several others in the cargo hold. He's not interested in Imperial credits, turns out, probably for good reason. He instead accepts half the agreed upon amount in calamari currency from Grief, Carl Weathers' character. We see a glimpse of his traumatic childhood, seemingly during the Clone Wars. He takes on a new job for an underworld client played by actor-director Werner Herzog, who's some kind of Imperial remnant, of Imperial remnant affiliation. The Mandalorian's told to bring in a target about 50 years of age. More on that later. And if necessary, feel free to kill the asset for a reduced fee. This client's working with a scientist, Dr. Pershing, who really isn't happy about the idea of this asset being delivered to them dead. The Mandalorian takes his down payment to the tribe, the refugee camp where his people live, and to a character called the Armorer, played by Emily Swallow, who actually voices Lisa Tepish in Netflix's Castlevania. So, there might be some crossover there and with some of our listeners. The Armorer forges him a shiny new pauldron, which is the armor over his right shoulder. And he heads off to a desert planet called Arvala 7, where he learns how to ride a fish horse thing called a blurg. Nick Nolte's Ugnaught character serves as his guide here. And when the Mandalorian arrives at the target's location, he meets IG-11, Taika Waititi's fast-shooting bounty hunter droid. And then things get pretty interesting at that point.
Yeah, they do. And we're going to get into that. Yay, that was a great recap. Thank you. And this was written by Jon Favreau and directed by rookie live-action director, new kid on the block, Dave Filoni. No.
Yeah.
His I don't know, live-action premiere.
Yeah, I believe so. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and it was amazing. I really enjoyed so much about this show. It really felt like they were digging into the genre feel, especially from the cinematography.
Yeah, I mean, we went into it with the Western podcast title and expecting sort of a Western wrapper for some of this stuff. And it does have that feel, certainly in the beginning, where the landscape and the setting is as much a character as anything else. And, even though we don't even get names of all these, cities necessarily and things like that. Mm-hmm. But, there's sort of an iconography to Westerns that, characters are sometimes a silhouette and sometimes the setting is, a desolate, empty kind of stark landscape. And we do get that in this. And it's, you see someone in shining armor with, a spaceship and a blaster, and they're coming into this very naturalistic sort of unmarred, landscape and trying to sort of take control of things a little bit. And the Mandalorian is apparently very good at that.
Well, and one thing that is common, even though he goes and visits, kind of an ice world, and he goes and visits sort of a volcanic world, and then he goes and visits a desert world, is that all of these nothing grows there yet, but they're kind of all on the edge of rebirth in some ways from a dead planet, live planet perspective. Frozen tundra is considered to be desert, which is interesting. So even though he's going to this frozen wasteland kind of place, it's still considered to be a desert. And then he goes to almost this volcanic planet, which I believe is kind of his home base of operations, because that's where his guild is and his tribe is, and his, it seems like that's where he hangs his hat, at least regularly. Not that he takes off his helmet. They make a point of that.
Yes.
And, it definitely feels like this is just showing us, again, multiple different ways that this is all wilderness, only kind of desperate people who are looking for a second chance or a chance to find peace or a chance to start over or a chance to make something of themselves somewhere else. And the gold rush to Alaska is a very Western tale. And that was it felt like that when they went to that ice planet, and, that volcanic planet felt like, we're trying to escape things, and that's a common theme with Westerns too, leaving civilization to go out into the wilderness to make something for yourself, because wherever you come from is no longer like a place you can be. All right, Nick Nolte's Ugnaught character, I'm going to butcher it, but Kuehl, he talks about how people that come to his planet are looking for peace. Like, they're looking for like rest. They're looking for, to not be disturbed. And, all of these different planets kind of fulfill that genre feel. And I think that that's really, really awesome. So in general, Alex, how did you feel about this episode?
I thought it was a lot of fun. In the first 5 minutes or so, I was like, is this just going to be sort of a straightforward, very, Western feeling look at the corner of the Star Wars universe? But it also went to a lot of places that I didn't expect. And that was nice. When Star Wars can still surprise you, right? I mean, there are people who would accuse Star Wars of being like a narrow range of ideas and settings and sort of what technology is and magic. But this was genuinely surprising, and it was thrilling, and all the characters raised so many questions. I'm very excited to, like, the minute the next episode goes live, to jump back in and figure out, how are they gonna, where are they gonna take this with the conflicts that they've set up, in the last few scenes, for sure.
And it very much feels like it's supposed to be one kind of continuous story, sort of like, like the series 24. Like, when we leave off in this moment, he's going to kind of pick it up in the next moment or very close after that. It definitely feels like that's what they're going for, because they kind of leave it off on these absolute cliffhangers, or at least this first episode was an absolute cliffhanger. And yeah, I agree. It, we got all this like preamble, information kind of, it's going to be a Western, it's going to be gritty, but then, it's rated PG on the Disney Plus app. And, my kids watched it with me this evening, and like, they loved it. They absolutely loved it. I watched Resistance with them. I've watched Rebels. I've watched Clone Wars. I've watched all the movies, and they were so enthralled by the actual storytelling. It was fascinating, actually, to watch. And they were interested, and they were like trying to figure out when the timeline was. And, it helped that we had just recently watched Return of the Jedi, so they kind of knew what was up a little bit, which was helpful. But to me, on a personal level, from, what I do with What the Force, specifically looking at larger themes and narratives and the very connotative meaning behind Star Wars, as well as, through this lens of mythic and genre storytelling, it fulfilled everything. And there was heavy theme related material that almost made it feel like the Western feel, although very core to Star Wars, was almost like a Mandalorian glaze on top of the core story of Star Wars, which is what I would hope for, being that Star Wars is one story and they're telling the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, it does look like a Western at a glance, but then, we started talking about it sort of in preparation for this episode, and immediately went to places that have nothing to do with, cowboys and revolvers and desert, you started talking about Arthurian stuff, and I started talking about Norse stuff. You started talking about, Greek goddesses.
Yeah.
So we, it very much, it starts in one place and takes you unexpected places. I think Ty Black said on Twitter, our friend Ty, that it's a Trojan horse, and it does feel that way. It feels like it's many things, rolled up into, yes, it's like a spaghetti Western, but it's, you peel back the layers, and yeah, it's very Star Wars, very original trilogy Star Wars.
Yeah, it had all of that feel to it, and yet it feels because of kind of I would say like the feeling behind what is being said and how it's being said, specifically with, like the symbolism on screen, the colors, the shadow, the, parallels to elsewhere in the saga. It felt more like The Last Jedi than I had ever seen anything ever be. It felt like they learned a lot from The Last Jedi and like wanted to bring that into the television show.
Absolutely. It had a Return of the Jedi kind of, like on paper sort of blueprint, but watching it and looking at the creature designs and the effects, it felt very much like The Last Jedi. And yeah, very, very sort of layered.
It felt like weird Star Wars.
Yes.
Yeah, and then like how George talks about filmmaking being filmmaking from a painter's school, so he layers on different things until it's kind of ready, So it's the layers of symbolism, the layers of cinematography, the layers of costume, the layers of so every aspect of this show is telling story, which is just so good to see. I enjoyed every second of it. I don't know. I enjoyed every second of it, and I'm super excited to see where they go.
Yeah. Yeah, even the costumes tell a story. I mean, he's got the flashy, very new kind of looking armor, and the armorer, the sort of Athena looking figure. She's got sort of more rustic, sort of traditional, possibly, semi-ancient looking armor by comparison. That's a story there. Everything.
Yeah, and even his cape looks like a blanket a little bit. Like it's got that camp blanket feel. Like he's trying to be what he should be, and we're going to get into that in a little bit, but he's trying to be what he should be, but he's not quite there yet, nor can he maybe afford all of the things that he feels like he should have, but he wants to be that. He wants to be that more than anything. I'm also just generally in love with the I must wear a mask trope that we see in The Mandalorian. For whatever reason, culturally, etc., it seems like once you take on this aspect, and I don't really know much about Mandalorians except for what we saw in Star Wars Rebels. So I'm super excited to find out more, especially since there seems to be this whole culture of them that are either refugees or part of this tribe that seems to be on this volcanic planet, which, again, if I know the names of them, I will say them. Just some really cool stuff. I noticed the calamari flan made squishy noises every time they set it down, and I just thought that was just absolutely delightful.
Yeah, there were all kinds of just little random
moments,
things that just the fact that his first bounty is not like a droid or a human, but is like this new species we've never seen before called a Mythrol, and it's a blue fish man with gills. I don't know. I immediately, because I knew that I was doing this podcast and had to try to think like you do a little bit, I was immediately like, the first time I went to church, I was told that Christ was like a fisher of men. And I was like, well, Mandalorian's going to go catch himself a fish, So to me, he's on this sort of spiritual quest that amounts to more than just money, which we see him refuse half of his payment in order to take a different currency type. So we know that he's not merely motivated by credits. He's motivated by some sort of higher quest or purpose, it seems to me. He's a spiritual figure, I think, right?
Yeah. There's a journey that he is on himself, and it certainly has to do, I think, with his history, which we find out through the episode, his flashbacks to being separated from his parents and being orphaned in a way. We don't know the status of his parents, but he became a foundling at some point, and then was almost brought into this tribe of Mandalorians that seems to almost have a ritualistic sort of sacred practice around what they do. And I think that we'll dig into that in the mythic section. What were some of the big things that you noticed? I mean, there was little small moments kind of all throughout it that just added to the layers of the storytelling, but what was some of the big stuff that you...
Oh gosh, I fixate on the little details, like the mounts that they ride later in the episode, the blurg.
Yeah.
Sort of very fishy, tadpole-like, reminded me of the caretakers from Octo.
Yeah, they did. Yeah.
There's the flame in the forge when the pauldron is being crafted. The flame is blue-white with maybe a touch of purple. So I sort of was thinking, okay, so it's extreme heat. This is very hot, but because it's Star Wars and he's a Mandalorian, maybe the purple hints at like a sense of royalty and the exotic. The fact that purple, I was always told, means royalty. Even when I wanted to be like, well, not in this case, it doesn't. I in college, it was always, no, purple means royalty, and so I don't know.
And
going
he was
along
wearing
with that.
he was wearing like a robe of some sort that seemed rich or important as a child, and that matched his parents.
It was a sort of burgundy. Yeah, that's very good. Very good call. That was also on that purple spectrum for sure. And
traditionally, like, especially when you're dealing with things like, what you can afford to wear, wearing things that are brown or tan or gray is easier because they don't have dyes in them, or they don't need to be dyed. Colors cost money, especially vibrant colors. And the fact that he was wearing this vibrant red is an indication, at least, of status. And it was like a velvet too, which is even more that.
Yeah. And we of course, we've talked about how, Lucas was inspired by Westerns and Sergio Leone and John Ford in particular. Well, in the Leone films, if people aren't familiar with like the Man with No Name trilogy or Once Upon a Time in the West that we sort of named the podcast after, just a key thing is that the hero in those movies is generally referred to as like the man with no name. It's just sort of the stranger from out of town. Their past is a mystery.
Like in Once Upon a Time in the West, he's called the Harmonica, and he has an orphan childhood upbringing. So, like, there's definitely that feel. They're trying to give us that he has a greater purpose and no name, which means he must like get to the point where he can earn his name back by whatever sort of redemption path or journey that he is on. But he certainly has a story to do that in. There's enough breadcrumbs to know he has some larger things at work. Anything else that was super big for you?
I don't know. In more like sort of obvious iconography, like the blanket that you mentioned, the sort of Afghan shawl, whatever you want to call it, that he wears. I mean, Clint Eastwood's sort of version of the Man with No Name, also sort of famously wears one of those. So, it's sort of just a thing that, sort of screams spaghetti Western when you look at it. You can't help but like wonder where they're going with things, and like they've sort of hinted in when they've talked in Entertainment Weekly to Favreau or Filoni, they've hinted that we might see the beginnings of the First Order in this series. I sort of got that vibe from this Dr. Pershing, who is sort of I don't know, it gave me sort of like that, Manhattan Project Nazi scientist sort of vibe, mad
definitely.
Genius. So, little things like that get you thinking. And of course, we've got the big MacGuffin at the end that we'll have to unpack it here at some point. But
that's a plot point, not a MacGuffin.
Yeah, a plot point. Yeah. It's a character.
So I wanted to talk about kind of the theme of children kind of being mentioned throughout the show. So even in the opening scene with our blue gill friend, our fish friend, he is as they're like, the guys in the bar, it looks like they've lost a game or something, and they're threatening to cut out his gills. The one guy says, "Oh, you're young. That means the gills will be more tasty, will sell more, or the whatever, But he points out that he is a fledgling. So that there's like this indication that this blue fellow, although kind of lewd and feels like a middle-aged dude, is actually quite a young version of his race. And then we have kind of the reminder of the foundlings. He himself, the Mandalorian, was a foundling, so orphaned and brought into the tribe, and then sort of given a purpose through this tribal, almost ritualistic atmosphere, and that he is giving back to those foundlings within that tribe and helping to support them with his actions. So it's like these children who are almost made of war, who are again like fulfilling some sort of role within that. And I found that really, really interesting from a theme perspective. And then again, at the very end with our plot point, our baby Yoda-like race, which we are characteristically calling him Baby Yoda because my son has a Yoda Zoom Zoom, which he has called Baby Yoda for his whole life since he's gotten him. And absolutely screamed when the baby showed up, and now my son is in love with the show. So I think that any kid that sees that Yoda on screen is so recognizable. They did such a good job. Kids love Yoda, like love Yoda. So that was brilliant. But again, child, which is ultra powerful, and we're going to dig into that from a mythic perspective in a little bit too. But I just loved that the children and like everybody is a child in some ways was kind of pervasive through the whole thing.
Yeah, IG-11 has a line like species age differently. And, you know, we know that Favreau, he made that Western in 2011, Cowboys and Aliens. He did a private screening with Steven Spielberg of John Ford's The Searchers. So I think it's fair to say that The Searchers is at least one big influence on the series. And in The Searchers, you know, as well as in Once Upon a Time in the West, things like that, like youth in these sort of landscapes is sort of rare and precious, the way that like gold and women are kind of like symbols of sort of freedom and peace and goodness in these movies, or in this case, a series. And children are even like more sort of scarce, right? And you know, Once Upon a Time in the West, particularly, you don't always get a happy ending for children, but in The Searchers, you know, the children are a thing that the sort of the enemy, you know, comes and might take away from you as a way of, you know, retaliation for the war that you perpetrated against them or things like that. So, I mean, there's definitely, you know, there's a sort of Western, you know, structure to these things, even though there's all these mythic layers and fairy tale layers on top, right? I think like just things like the Baby Yoda and sort of the hints of what we've seen of the Mandalorian culture, it does sort of scream spaghetti Western to me, despite how we've said that it's so much more than that. But I
think it's just a really good Venn diagram of how Star Wars can be more than one thing and still have all of these different lenses to help tell the story in these layers.
Yeah, we always talk about how Star Wars is a story about family and generational sort of, you know, the young people become the mentors. You know, Luke Skywalker, you know, grows up and gets a silver beard. You know, so for this show to not necessarily have like a father-son relationship at the heart of it yet, or to not have, you know, Rey searching for her family, we do have these sort of, you know, very mature figures who are sort of lost. And then we have the children who seemingly depend on them for protection, right? Which is like a very sort of elemental thing in life, right? Is that, you know, sort of our compassion and our value as human beings comes from like, you know, at one point we had a mother and we needed her to care for us and all that. So I don't know. It's fascinating. It's
there's like a very large amount of women that find like compassionate dad like men to be incredibly attractive. And
the ending of this episode, yeah,
like adding that in literally made him like mask, armor, body, all of that, him like being this like stalwart guy who also seems to care about his community. He's like a knight in shining armor in so many ways. Mm-hmm. Plus he knows how to take care of a baby. Like like ovaries just exploded all over the place. Like you know, yeah. they made this very, very femme gaze, even though it is supposed to be like guy heavy. They're like trying to walk that line between, you know, trying to make Star Wars for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I was nervous about that. You know, I was like, so I'm going to come onto What the Force and do a limited sort of spin-off series with you. When I'm used to listening to your podcast and hearing about feminine gaze and the sequel trilogy. And I was like, you know, is it going to be a guy co-host coming in to talk about this very male gazy, masculine, gritty thing? And and Dave Filoni sort of said, you know, you thought, no. And yeah, and he, you know, and Twitter is just so much fun right now because of all the, you know, the Pedro Pascal thirst is alive on the Twitter.
I mean, I've loved him since Game of Thrones, and he's just amazing, and I can't wait for them to take that mask off. But that's like the climax of the series is when he actually decides to take off his mask. I think he's got a different like character arc peak that will need to happen as well, and I think we'll go into that in just a moment. I have a couple of kind of open questions that I just want to pose out there to the listeners, and if you have any thoughts on these, feel free to like respond on Twitter or on YouTube in the comment section. Just like give us your thoughts, because like I'm trying to figure this stuff out just like you guys are. And this is more plot-based stuff. And so maybe not stuff that I necessarily care about until the creators decide to tell me. From a speculative perspective, I'm not really that good at speculation other than through a mythic lens to say, this is what the story's telling me. That turned out to be true. But so here's some of my questions for all of you. Why does the Mandalorian want more jobs and money than everybody else? Was it purely for his armor situation, which we see in the episode, framed in the episode? Or is it something bigger? And what could that be? Revenge? Finding his family? What do you think he's all about? I'm super excited to hear your thoughts on this. And then, what is a foundling? Is it just related to this, you know, being a Mandalorian and almost like a priesthood where you're like found as a kid and like brought in to, you know, being part of this Mandalorian tradition? I'm really excited to see what that's all about. I want to know what you guys think about it too. Also, you know, rebuilding the armor, what does that represent? We're going to go into some of that a little bit because I have some ideas. But you know, why is this important for him? And what does it mean for him? I think is just really, really fascinating. And then also, you know, from a character perspective, him generally speaking, supporting his community at large. Is that like his way of giving back for being a foundling, or is it something bigger? Do you have any kind of questions for our listening audience, Alex?
Oh, gosh. I mean, I have like sort of a thought on the foundlings thing if you're interested, but
sure.
You know, I like within the context of that, the thing that I was thinking is that, you know, Mandalorians are at least like their sort of ancient culture pre, you know, Duchess Satine and mm-hmm. all the bad stuff that went down in the Clone Wars. You know, there was sort of a warlike proud race in some of the background lore. And so to me, the fact that she says the excess will sponsor many foundlings tells me that Mandalorians have a lot of like orphans of war. And the fact that he would need to sponsor foundlings mean that maybe there's more children than they can like even afford to keep around and feed. And maybe they work the forge. Yeah. I don't know. That was just sort of my my notes on that.
Well, I like the idea that it helps them get their masks and gets their armor. Like it's your first like, you know, this helped sponsor this child so that they could actually don the armor themselves. And that feels very, even though they call it a tribe, it feels very like knightly in some ways, but like more like crusader in some ways. Like you're sponsoring somebody to join this almost holy mission. You know, especially with the armor feel, it feels like that more than necessarily something related to just straight war. It feels like it has almost like a religious or sacred tradition connotation. And we'll definitely get into that when we talk about the Forge from a mythic perspective. Whew.
I guess the one question that I might have is I had noticed that there are sort of very wildly different opinions on, this show is sort of advertised, and I was at the Mandalorian panel at Celebration as well, and I was really sold by the things that Favreau and Filoni had to say about it, but I also got the sense that it was sort of the fan servicey type of thing for the sort of older, possibly male fan who, really loved reading those short stories about Boba Fett back in the day and things like that. And some people are still saying that it feels that way, that it's sort of Rogue One-esque and it's fan servicey. And yet I feel like it's so far removed from what I kind of was worried that it might be. It feels so, I'm very pleasantly surprised by just how Last Jedi it is. And do people feel that it's fan servicey and predictable? Or
I would say A New Hope was more gritty than this episode.
Yeah, sure. A little bit. Yeah.
The burning of the homestead, like that was way darker than anything we saw in this movie.
Yeah. Uncle Owen did not quite deserve what he got. He's kind of a jerk, but that was gruesome. And we don't really see, I think
the guy cut in half. My kids jumped at that, by the way. So
yeah. It cuts away, but it's very implied that you see his bottom half
thump of the body.
You do see the thud of his pants or whatever.
It's no dude that gets thrown into the like the blender in the fight scene in The Last Jedi.
Throne room. Oh yeah.
Yeah, in the throne room, like Kylo shoves him into the blender and he goes brah, or the wood chipper basically. No, but I don't know. I feel like it's just very in line with the storytelling that we have already seen from the Disney era of Star Wars, which aligns to the movie properties and the animation properties that we've previously received. The things that are no longer kind of being told in that way is the books. Now they align with the Disney era storytelling. Everything is part of this larger one story. It felt like being at home in Star Wars to me, from my perspective. I don't think that it's a change at all from the Star. It's just, again, Star Wars in Mandalorian armor.
Yeah. Even as something as simple as the title, right? Like people don't refer to this as Star Wars episode, 14, The Mandalorian. It is The Mandalorian. And, I thought maybe they would sell this as this is prestige TV, right? This is Better Call Saul in space. Star Wars, never heard of it. This is The Mandalorian. This is something else. And no, it's completely not divorced from the stuff that we love and we consume regularly in the, the Marvel comics or in the, J.J. Abrams and Rian Johnson trilogy. And I was so pleasantly surprised with how well it is not its own separate thing in the way that I expected.
I wanted to, was there anything that you wanted to add to the genre of Westerns? I know it felt like a spaghetti Western in some ways. And it felt that way kind of throughout the show, especially when the Mandalorian walked, you heard the spur sound. It had that, his guns, him kind of having the self-talk occasionally when he was all by himself. It's so funny. He talked more to himself than he did to other people when he was all alone. It just felt like it had that Western flavor, maybe more than I've seen in Star Wars before. So that was definitely there. And the music by Ludwig Göransson certainly helped.
And speaking of him, he scored Black Panther for the Marvel films. And that's where I wanted to go is actually that, you asked about Westerns, and Westerns, the Native Americans, the people are the buffalo, and the sort of the white colonial man, the other side of the us and them divide that a typical old 50s Western might have, they're represented by Gould. You have gold in industry, and you have nature and the buffalo. And the Wakandans had the vibranium. You get these cultures of people who are united around like a single invaluable sort of sacred thing. And the Mandalorians have this Beskar steel and of course we'll talk more about the Forge, but the fact that this Beskar is used as payment, as a form of currency, but also they can smelt it down, and use it as armor or weaponry, like the Norse gods wore armor made of gold in a normal forge, they just, things like that. But then they would take on magical properties, somehow because it's myth. Yeah. But, this Beskar is like very unique to Mandalore and the Mandalorian culture. And it's sort of like it's a symbol for who they are as a people, is that Beskar steel, that kind of, in Game of Thrones, is that Valyrian steel? You have this thing where this sort of
star metal, right? Star metal we've seen, like meteorite metal is special. Like it had this, it has a mythic quality to it.
Yeah, like the Kyber, right?
Yeah, the Kyber, yeah. No, definitely. And it is both of the armor and of the people. And it was really interesting when Werner Herzog's character said, it's good to have things restored to the natural order. Like he even realizes the importance of the Beskar to the Mandalorians, like what it means on a deeper level. And yet he probably doesn't even really realize how deep the Beskar means. It's almost like, I get the feeling like it almost is like representative of like their skin in some ways.
Oh, well, in Mandalorian case, yeah, because they do all like wear the mask, generally speaking. Yeah, that's interesting.
Like it's like, this is of us. We are made of Beskar in some way. And like that to the we are the buffalo concept as well is very, very similar.
Yeah, and I mean, like the Wakandans, wearing Black Panther, wearing the sort of vibranium suit ties into that, I guess, to go with my metaphor about the people with the very, sacred cultural thing that comes from the earth, but is also somehow unique to them and their planet or their people. It seems to me that maybe the Empire came in, right, and sort of, took this thing from them at one point, is sort of maybe the implication.
Well, it said during the Great Purge. So
interesting.
So it was mentioned that it was taken from the Mandalorian people during the Great Purge, which who knows what that is? Could be the Jedi Purge. I don't think so, but maybe that's like when occupation of Mandalore happened.
Yeah, we haven't seen like some of the Mandalore stuff in the Clone Wars yet. And by the time we get to Rebels, it's sort of a very different situation where they're kind of splintered off into these different, houses, so to speak, different tribes. And that's kind of where we find, the Mandalorian here in the show is like, it's just sort of one clan of the larger, culture that's been kind of fractured off,
I do want to mention there is a couple of knightly aspects to the Mandalorian himself, him forging his armor. Like the last thing you do as a knight is forge armor for yourself to say, I am now fully like this knight, right? And he's almost wearing like borrowed and broken and rusty armor from either other people, and it's mismatched and it doesn't quite fit him correctly. And slowly over time, as he's doing more and more of this work, he is gaining like the ability to have more of this armor. And there's also like him being part of the Bondsman Guild comes with a specific code of honor that is referred to by IG-11. And like, they don't steal each other's bounties, and they have to have the right for that bounty. And, you know, they have to like report things to the guild. Like, there's a whole code of honor with being a bounty hunter, which is so interesting. And he seems to be kind of one of the good guys, because he kind of goes by the rules most of the time. It seems like, at least.
Yeah, they're in the middle of a very like typical Western shootout, complete with giant Gatling gun, you know, the very phallic Western thing, and lots of blaster fire everywhere. And they stop to sort of have a gentleman's handshake conversation about, so how are we going to deal with the paperwork? And
yeah.
They could just shoot each other right there, and just you know, the way that you know, in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the guy who's considered the ugly is because he's operating almost purely out of like greed and human impulse, you know, and that's what's ugly about him. But the Mandalorian is a complicated guy who apparently has, you know, a very certain moral code, like you said, very knightly. And then IG-11, of course, is a droid, so he's, you know, programmed
by the letter of the law, right?
Yeah.
So his programming, and I'm going to have to go into him probably in a later episode more in detail, because like, he was a joy, and I love droids so much. And he was exactly what I would picture like an off the shelf droid. And because he got sort of shot in the head, we're going to get a death and rebirth and a growth story from him.
Yeah. Yeah, he was almost like he was naive and very, not naive, but in the sense that he trusted the Mandalorian as much as the Mandalorian trusted a droid to perform as programmed, you know? And then he kind of suffered for it and found out that,
but also he was like aligned to his programming. His base instincts were to kill himself multiple times during that fight, right? Like, that was his instincts. And the Mandalorian is like, literally, don't kill yourself, please. Don't self-destruct. Do not he tried to save him so many times from himself, right? And I think that that's going to be like, you know, I don't think this is a spoiler, because literally we get to see him with Cara Dune in the future. So he's coming back. Like, he's fine. He'll be like reforged or fixed or whatever. But this is a death rebirth for this droid, which is like so exciting to see, because he's going to grow from the experience. And I love seeing droids learn. It's just like, it's joy for me.
Yeah. Yeah. I expect he'll be fun to watch from here on out. And just, you know, I don't think that he'll be such a nice droid the next time that the Mandalorian runs into him, right? Like, now he's sort of... You
assume he's not going to take him with him.
Take him with him?
He might.
Oh, okay.
Like the Mandalorian might take him with him and fix him.
Yeah, he could fix him. That's true. He could be like, hey, I didn't want to do that. I just wanted to protect the baby.
The baby.
Yeah.
The baby. Yeah. Oh, I
fascinating.
Think so. Yeah.
Fascinating.
So I wanted to move now into sort of some of the mythic elements that we definitely saw. But before I get into that, I just want to do a quick, brief explanation of kind of two different monomyths that are almost in competition in this show. And it's going to feel weird, I think, especially if one monomyth ends up winning out when people are kind of expecting another monomyth to win. And what I'm referring to is the monomyth, i.e. The Hero's Journey by Joseph Campbell, versus what has been worked on since then from a story perspective. There's the concept of the specific American monomyth. And it was an idea that was improved upon Joseph Campbell's monomyth when people realized that specifically American cultural media didn't necessarily align to the Campbellian monomyth from a Occidental and Oriental mythology perspective. It actually kind of follows a different feel. In Campbell's monomyth, the hero journeys from the normal world into the supernatural world wins decisive victories, and returns with a boon to the community. And that's the goal, is to like kind of change and transform the community with the knowledge that they have learned along the way. Whereas in the American monomyth, which we constantly see in superhero mythos and in Westerns and many kind of action adventure hero storytelling, is that a community in a harmonious paradise is threatened by evil. Normal institutions fail to contend with this threat. A selfless hero emerges from like either nowhere or within the community and renounces the temptation, carries out redemptive tasks, aided by fate. His victory is decisive, and then restores the community to its condition before, as much as it can be, and then leaves. So either dies or like decides to leave the community and doesn't stay to kind of improve the community and pass on the stories to the next generation. Westerns follow the American monomyth. The guy who comes in and saves the day ends up having to ride off into the sunset. And we already know that this Mandalorian is part of a tribe. He is part of a community, and he is part of a culture that he is trying to help and protect. What do you think of that, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I think of like the sort of I took a class in college called American Thought, and we sort of studied the great American philosophers, and what they often believe is that, you know, colonial America was a bunch of deeply, deeply repressed puritanical people who sort of, as Bly would say, they hid much of their self away in a shadow, in a bag that they carried behind them. And so to gain enlightenment was to leave your tribe, to leave your school, your institutions, to leave your society, and to go out in the woods and bathe in a lake and read poetry, and knowledge would come not from a library, but from a sunset, or from, and this is not unique to America, but I mean, it's very much an American thing that, you go out in the woods and you throw your cell phone in the lake, and you, let your laptop die and don't have your charger with you, and you take in the world around you, and you sort of open yourself up to this romantic ideal that, the sublime of the world around you, and your sort of intuition, and your, you had the deists, the founding fathers, who believed that, human reason, right? Like that was, humans are we have this gift of reason, and that comes from God, and we can think through anything. We'll be fine. And then we nuked a country not long after that, and round and around we go, and we're gonna build walls, and so human reason only gets you so far, but yeah, those ideals, the nostalgia for those ideals of the frontier, and we can go out in the frontier, and we can be our own individual, and we can, get married and just live peacefully, and
mm-hmm.
To hell with industry and empire and capitalism. We'll just remove ourselves from that. That's very much alive and well in like Westerns, and those stories are still being told. I mean, you got
mm-hmm.
No Country for Old Men, and Hell or High Water. You still got those stories coming out. So
we're still very much enamored by this storytelling, and it hasn't changed. Like the hero doesn't get to stay and kind of like live with the community. And I think that that's like such a stark difference with Campbell's like view on the community being the center of the myth, like coming back and like improving the community is so important to him.
Mm-hmm. I think Campbell probably, I don't know what he said about Westerns specifically, but it would be something that he would consider very immature, right? If you're, to be mature is to be able to exist within the society and
mm-hmm.
thrive within it and help one another and not be, there's that book, The Road by Cormac McCarthy. And, the father is all about, don't talk to anybody. Don't look at anybody. Don't give food to anybody. And the little boy says, like, no, we need to help them. We need to work together. And that to me is like the essential, like, sort of American coin of thought there. The boy and the father and the road,
Yeah.
Individualism is great and it'll get you places, but at the end of the day, you have to ask Marie Claire what she thinks about Star Wars Episode 9, and and not just it's no fun for me to sit alone in a room and be like, this is what I thought about the Mandalorian.
The Monomyth is just how to teach kids how to grow up and exist within society. It's how to, get along with others so that we can, as a community, as a society, as humanity, help improve ourselves through our story. And like the fact that the Mandalorian himself is almost like trying to find purpose is like super good, because it's, the call to adventure. You don't always get a choice when fate knocks, right? And fate has knocked hard by the end of this episode.
Yeah.
And, do you want to talk a little bit about kind of some of the mythic symbolism stuff that we caught in this episode? I mean,
yeah,
it. We kind of already started to dig into it, but I really do want to spend some time on the forge itself, which has so much symbolism. There was a bunch of people on Twitter that were pointing out the similarities, especially my friend Chelsea North Gales.
Yeah, like North Gallus, I think. Something like that.
Yeah. My friend Chelsea North Gallus, who pointed out the similarities in the Mandalorian walking down the stairs and then down the tunnel to how TFA framed Rey's walk down the stairs and through the tunnel. And in both of those circumstances, like, it's a journey into self. Like, so he walks through kind of like a portal. He walks down the stairs into his subconscious, and there he has a conversation with a goddess, which is so interesting from like a heroine's journey perspective and a mythological perspective, to say, we're having conversations about your past and your present and your future.
Yeah, and when you guys brought up the Forge, or when you brought up the Forge to me, on Twitter and stuff, like, I immediately recalled this short story from Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology retellings called "The Treasures of the Gods," which is sort of like the only time that I could recall immediately the Forge being in like a myth that I'd actually read, and basically. Thor and Sif awaken to find that Loki has gotten drunk and cut all Sif's hair off while she was sleeping. And so Thor is like furious, and he immediately assumes Loki did it, because he says like, it'll save a lot of time if I just assume Loki did it. And Loki's like, yeah, it was funny. I was drunk. And so Thor goes off to Svartalfheim, where the dwarfs have their forges, and he holds a contest between, these two rival, foundries, or blacksmithies, and basically whoever wins is going to craft a golden wig for Sif. But through the contest, it's a total scam, because through the contest, they're crafting all these amazing golden treasures for the gods, and they all get, they take the ingots of gold and iron, and the dwarfs simply do their job, perform their master craft, and from that you get these like magical things that are associated with the Norse gods. So it's almost like the forge itself and the sort of ritual act of blacksmithing is itself where the magic comes from. So you take gold and you smelt it down, which again, there's that Beskar steel is so important in this episode. That's like the gold of this universe, apparently, of Mandalorian culture. And then, of course, you brought up Athena, which is
I was gonna So she's called the Armorer.
The Armorer.
Yeah. So he enters in through this into this sacred zone, and there's like the forge itself, which is fire, and it has this very sacred space. He's like respectful. He sits his butt down. He waits patiently for her to be ready. He's very like cowed in some ways towards her and her position. She's almost got like, I actually like pinged my friend and I'm like, you mean the matriarchal forge priestess that operates the magical forge of the Mandalorians? Because like she's almost like that. She's just like this almost like priestess type character, but in so many ways she really does feel like Athena. So specifically the helmet that she is wearing, which I know is very similar to a Mandalorian style that already existed, but it also looks like the goddess Athena's helmet, specifically with the bridge of the nose and the overall shape of it. And, you know, the goddess Athena is associated with wisdom and owls, which we have seen owls specifically associated with Mandalorians in the past. I'm talking about Sabine Wren. She actually has the owl on her pauldron. Dave Filoni connection there. So, you know, I don't doubt that they know about this concept. So Athena, but she is also a goddess of war and defense of cities. So she is war in the sense that it is smart, strategic war and in defense of the people who live within the cities. And I get the feeling that the armorer is that. Like she is almost like a sacred representation of this spirit of intelligent war that the Mandalorians are like, you know, all about. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a very sort of like reverent moment where he comes into this space and, you know, he's not, you know, he doesn't sort of like shout out her name or anything like that. He like comes in and sits down very, you know, ritualistically. She does the same, sort of mirrors him. She's this very like powerful sort of, you know, imposing figure. You know, she's got her, you know, the helmet is that Greco-Roman style that you'd see in like, you know, Zack Snyder's 300 or Troy with Brad Pitt or, you know, Assassin's Creed Odyssey. You know, it is, you know,
very
it's
Grecian.
Not just,
it's very Grecian.
Yeah. And it's, you know, I think that, you know, you hit it right on the head when you say like that she's like this protector. So she's arming Mandalorians with this very significant armor and sort of granting them, you know, she says like a pauldron would be in order, you know, perhaps a pauldron is in order, something like that. So it's almost as though she's making the call, like she's saying like, I have judged you worthy of this piece of armor almost. And the camera lingers on it. It's so important. This little piece of shoulder armor, like she has given him, you know, something truly, you know, almost sacred and very significant to who he is and becoming like his sort of truer, more complete self.
True self. Yeah.
A truly, yeah, it's all there on the screen. Like it's very important. And
well, I loved also that it was like he just literally handed over everything that he had made in the last couple of scenes. So he handed over the calamari flan, which made the squishy noise again, which was amazing. And then he handed over the Beskar, thunk, onto the table. She took it all and gave him a measly pauldron and then said, oh, look, there is actually lots left over, but I'm going to give it to the foundlings. And he was like, that is good. I was once a foundling. That exchange was so interesting. Just because it like showed this utter respect for her as the woman who was like making the decisions on what was appropriate and right in the moment. And he was cool with it.
Yeah, he's presenting her like this token, right? You come and you pay your respects to the shrine of the gods, and in this case, he puts the sort of imperial stamped ingot of Beskar, and she says like, "Here's what I can do for you with this." And also, as soon as you mentioned Athena, and I looked it up in Hamilton's mythology, it also says that she's the inventor of the bridle, which was used to tame horses for riding, apparently in Greece. So. Another, there's a whole section of a whole sequence of this episode where, he's got to learn how to ride the fish horse thing and the tadpole, the mount. And,
I like their little T-Rex arms. They were super cute.
So the fact that the forge is like the centerpiece of the episode, and you said Athena, and there are other pieces of Athena throughout the episode, like that's significant to me. Or, it's definitely, the forge feels like his most sort of interior moment where, you're getting stuff from him from the set, the environment, and not from, what Carl Weathers is saying to him or how he's reacting to the armor.
Yeah.
It's
again, it's those layers of storytelling. It's what you see on screen. It's the sound design. It's the music. It's the costume design. It's the moments between moments. Yes. It's all coming together.
It's good. It's very Star Wars. It's so much more than I dared hope for. It's so good. It's so much fun.
I did want to talk a little tiny bit about the concept of a signet and the armor itself, just briefly. So the armor mentions, do you have a signet yet? And so, that word comes from a signet ring, which was used as a way to, seal wax or present your almost coat of arms to others so that they would know that it was you. And for, a signet is like a signifier, signatory, like it's got that same root from a Latin perspective of the name. And essentially it was the same as your signature or your name. And it represents like he is waiting for his true name. And I suspect it's something like, like the symbol on his armor or something. And what was so cool was she was like, soon, I think. Yeah, that was so good.
Yeah, he says not yet, and she says soon. So it raises the question of, is there some sort of oracle that's going to divine, or is he someone of significance that, we have yet to learn because of, his sort of past as an orphan?
Or does he need to have enough of his armor or enough to buy, like, especially the breastplate? And like the breastplate, from an Athena perspective, is one of the aegises. Aegis being, a protection device that represented or stood in the place of a almost like a gift from the gods, a way of showing the power and authority of the position the hero would take onto the battlefield. And that's what I feel like completed Mandalorian armor almost is like a permanent aegis on them, because the Beskar itself like deflects blaster bolts. Like he's almost impervious in some ways. And it's like almost you're a true symbol when you're in the all the shiny armor.
So would you say Aegis is sort of like a talisman with like an aura to it, like the sort of like the opposite?
I mean,
of an
like they were like
Achilles heel?
magical. They were like magical, like shields or a piece of armor that represented that god.
Okay, so in like Clash of the Titans, he goes around and collects all those goofy little like the things that he like the mirror shield in order to defeat Medusa and things like that. Kind of
specifically
along those lines,
like these
maybe.
are like I mean, like they are like a symbol of the god, and they also fulfill like a stand-in for their power. So they can be like a gift from the god, or they could be a almost like a oh, you did this and you have this token of the battle that you fought, and now it's blessed by that god.
Gotcha.
Okay, let's talk about Baby Yoda, who is probably not Baby Yoda reborn, because this baby is 50 years old. I now unfortunately am questioning whether Yoda was actually teaching younglings at the age of 8, like for the past 800 years, because he'd be like, what, like 2? Unless they had him like, they had this baby like frozen or something. I'm sorry, I'm way too logical in this. Let's go back a step. Let's talk about this baby. What'd you think of the baby?
Yeah. I mean,
a second.
Well, the Yoda had said something. There is a line where Yoda says, like, for 800 years have I trained Jedi. So he had to be like 100-year-old man to even, something like that. I think he was like 100 is like the implication in like Empire Jedi, So, I mean, definitely, the Yoda race is a big mystery, and it continues to be. And that's why this is so significant, right? Is the fact that we don't know what Yoda's species is called. I mean, that's something that...
We know that Yaddle was another one of them. That's all we know.
Yes.
And Yaddle was on the council during the Phantom Menace, the Jedi Council during the Phantom Menace. I don't know. There's definitely a lot of the found baby mythos, which Joseph Campbell has talked about in his books as well as in mythology in general. There, like Moses was a found baby in, the reeds in the Nile, and then adopted by sort of the ruling powers of Egypt and protected in that way. That sort of origin story is a hint to show this is a person who is going to be a hero in the future when they grow up. That like foundling story is they are going to be a hero.
Benjamin Button, right? Curious Case of Benjamin Button.
Yeah.
I mean, I think I've only really seen like the David Fincher film, but it's pretty excellent. And it's sort of that idea that, some stranger leaves their baby on your doorstep, and you apparently feel responsible for it, and that it's a baby of great significance because it is in a story of sort of mythic proportions, and And
I found that there was quite a large parallel to Elora Danan from Willow, in that, this baby, just by the very nature of looking like Yoda and Yaddle, looks like they will probably have force powers. This is a force baby in a lot of ways, and a powerful force baby. And so, in Willow, Elora Danan, it has a prophecy about how she will bring the end to kind of the evil sorceress that exists in the land, who's making everything terrible. And so, the evil sorceress, in a way of fulfilling that prophecy, ends up trying to kill this baby. So it's got that feel to it, but either way, we'll have to wait to see how this baby's story ends up being fulfilled, and what ends up happening. But all we know is that the Mandalorian would rather deactivate IG-11 than risk the baby coming to harm, and it shows a great deal of character compassion within him.
Yeah, one thing we know about the Yoda race is that they're exceedingly rare. If we've only seen, 2 of them in canon, and then there was maybe 1 or 2 others in the whole expanded universe, and even when they did put them in Legends, they still didn't have a backstory and a home world, a name for their race. Like there's like this incredible mystery to them that's almost like, the idea of the unnamed transcendent or something. Like the Mandalorian must feel that a baby has has an immense amount of power to be worth saving and double crossing somebody who he just made like a sort of a handshake agreement with, somebody on his team, so to speak.
Especially how like it could come back and harm him with his, the source of his income. It's like going against your employer.
Yeah. And Herzog's character, the client, he made a point to say, bounty hunting is a complicated profession. If you have to kill him, okay. But he's not willing to do that. So, this idea that you have this like rare, possibly, you know, endangered sort of species that has like this sort of mystical significance. Is I don't know. It sure does make you wonder. You know, how long this baby is going to be. You know, is this baby going to be in the majority of the season? Is it just something, you know, that's laying groundwork for, you know, the future seasons,
future storytelling? Stories? Yeah.
Yeah.
We know that the baby will be, because they call the baby the asset, which is really interesting because that almost dehumanizes the baby, who is Baby Yoda for now. But my friend, Star Wars shipper, online on Twitter actually pointed out that the baby being 50 years old means that the baby was born in and around when Anakin was born.
Yeah, 41 years before Yavin, so episode 4, which is interesting for sure. Anakin is not an insignificant character in the Star Wars universe.
Yeah,
so,
no,
yeah,
and
fascinating.
This draws an in-universe parallel to Ezra Bridger, who was born the day before Luke and Leia. So Ezra Bridger, who is the main sort of focal point hero of Star Wars Rebels, was born on Empire Day, which is the day before Luke and Leia were born. So he's literally the same age as them as they grow up, and he kind of almost experiences things, you know, from a different lens. Like it's almost like an alternative reality if like they always knew or they became Jedi earlier or something like that. But like it tells kind of this story of a Force user growing up under the Empire. And, you know, this is telling us that there's some sort of era that we need to know about between the prequels and post original trilogy era, potentially even into the future.
Yeah.
Cool.
And Palpatine.
That's all I have to say about that.
even when we meet him, Palpatine is not a young guy in The Phantom Menace. So there's this sort of question, what were the Sith up to when Anakin was, born, 9 years before The Phantom Menace? Darth Maul has the line, like, at last we will reveal ourselves to the Jedi. We've been waiting 9 years for this, 9 years on the dot, I mean, I don't know, but yeah, it's a nice little, question mark for sure that, what happened in the Force, like now we have, there's been an awakening. Have you felt it? What happened 9 years before The Phantom Menace? And, where are we going to get the answer to that? That's the endlessly fascinating thing about this new era of Star Wars, right? Is things like Rebels, they sort of introduce these, wacky new sort of curveballs. Like, hey, there's more Yodas and they're, cute little babies. What does that mean? Where are they going with this? So yeah, like you said, it's a mythical parallel, but it's fun.
Yeah. It's fun. And it also helps us tell, like, okay, what is the significance of this baby a little bit more, so that we can kind of go, oh, it's not just a baby, but we knew it wasn't just a baby because it's Yoda. But how it was presented and the fact that we now have like daddy Mandalorian instincts, daddy Mando daddy, I don't know what we should call him now. But it definitely gives him a different lens in which we view the story.
Yeah.
I do want to point out that the whole soundtrack for Chapter 1 is now available on Spotify under Ludwig Göransson's Spotify channel. And in the asset track specifically, I listened to it like 6 times, and I needed Felicia, who's been on the podcast before, to talk about music. And I pinged her and I was like, hey, Felicia, I hear Yoda's theme just a touch. Can you confirm this for me? And she's like, yeah, there's definitely something there. So they're definitely, Ludwig Göransson is touching on Yoda's theme as we recognizably see a Yoda type species on screen, which is just so exciting. So I do kind of want to talk about something from a metatextual perspective, which is how many feminine things were brought up overall in the show, even though we only had technically one woman on screen with speaking lines. We got to see the Mandalorian's mother and like a few kind of women in the background and things like that. But the ship itself looks like a female reproductive system, which is just crazy. The blurgs are only females because they eat their mates in mating.
Mm-hmm.
The baby Yoda itself comes in kind of almost like an egg-shaped thing and is almost born from that. And there's a really cool Chosen One prophecy that, once all about eggs and stuff like that. I'm sure people are going to go wild about that. I don't think it's related to that. I think it was just more to show, this very egg-like, birthing situation with the baby Yoda. But then, did you notice anything else from?
Oh gosh, I mean, stuff like the ship looking like female, reproductive organs. I mean that goes over my head the first time. I think that the tunnel when he's sort of descending into the forge, I was like, oh, what's Marie Claire gonna think of this? Is this a birth canal?
I thought it was a subconscious chip.
Yeah,
it's fine. Yeah. But I do want to say, there's almost like a nudge and a wink with how many times names actually are straight up with the word myth. So we have the Mythosaurus, which existed in Legends, but we don't really know much about it other than in Legends, at least the Mandalorian symbol, the one that we see over top of the forge, is from the Mythosaurus. And our Nick Nolte Ugnaught, because I can't pronounce his character's name yet, says it's part of your heritage to ride the Mythosaurus. You can do this, and it's almost like reminding the audience, myth is the way that we should be talking about these stories, and myth is okay. We should just ride this myth.
He literally says, the Ugnaught Quill or whatever, he says, I've never met a Mandalorian, but I've read the stories. That's very Ken Liu. That's very Legends of Luke Skywalker. I don't know. That's
it's all this the story will come. Just enjoy the ride, right? Mm-hmm. You can do this. Myth is like riding like a kid. You'll get it, right? It'll come to you. And the other myth kind of related word was the name of our blue guild friend, fish friend from the beginning of the episode, which was the Mithril, which is just so nice to see that myth is not only in the symbolism, but straight up in names of creatures and races on screen.
Absolutely. Yeah. In the advertisements and stuff, I thought maybe this would be, are we going to get a Star Wars that's aimed at adults and very, sort of serious and, it's very much, it's something that, a child would pick up on some of this stuff, in terms of, how straightforward it is. We watch some Westerns to prepare for this. And sometimes those plots can be, very simple. Sometimes they can be very, Once Upon a Time in the West, I don't think that any sort of real plot is understood until the hour 40-minute mark. The Mandalorian is a very straightforward story so far. And the fact that, we've got blue young men with gills and, creature from the Black Lagoon looking guys and, fish horses with little T-Rex hands. It's a nice balance. They've got that sort of, they've still got one foot in this sort of holiday special, where they don't forget where they come from with this stuff,
Boba
right? Yeah. Like Star Wars can get pretty heady.
Weird.
It is a rich tapestry of stuff, but at the same time, we've still got Kowakian monkey lizards in this thing, and it's such a joy.
Yeah, and jokes. It was funny. I laughed. Yes. My son kept on laughing.
I mean, you talked about the self-destruct things. That's played for laughs because he's sort of a coward, right? That's sort of Like, I want to check out of this. Like, I didn't sign up for this. And, it's a full-on shootout. It's total chaos. He's like, I'm just going to blow myself up to save myself the stress of the gunfight, and that's pretty funny. Yeah, that's hilarious.
Well, I loved Chapter 1, and I very much look forward to Chapter 2, which we do have the synopsis already available for us on IMDb. It is, target in hand, the Mandalorian must now contend with scavengers. So maybe something on the planet he's currently on before he leaves, or, gets waylaid along the way. Who knows?
We know that Trandoshans are coming in this series, and I think we got a glimpse of one in one of those cantinas, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was the first cantina or the second one. Yeah.
Maybe where he met Grief, where he got paid. I'm not sure.
Yeah. So looking forward to this episode, which will be out later on this week. So we will update this podcast as soon as we are able to record our deep dive into it afterwards. All right, Alex, where can people find you if they are looking for you online other than this podcast?
I mostly live on Twitter at Alex J. Kane, Kane. And I write for anybody who will, let me talk about video games or Star Wars or culture. So I'm working on stuff for PC Gamer, StarWars.com, and I cover Bethesda games for Forbes now.
Awesome. So check out his stuff and follow him on Twitter to make sure to keep up with everything he's got going on. And I think that the best sign off for this episode is the Ugnaughts' famous line that he repeated so many times: I have spoken.
I have spoken.
Thank you for listening to What the Force. I'm Marie-Claire Gould, your host. Our music is the What the Force theme, orchestral music by Christy Carew for What the Force. We have a Patreon at patreon.com/whattheforce. We'd like to thank all our patrons, especially those who love What the Force. And for those patrons obsessed with What the Force, Melody, Night Huntress in Wild Space, Susan, Jessica, Cassandra Corvid, Brad, Black Eyed Lily, and Anna Perez. Make sure you like and subscribe on YouTube or leave a 5-star review on iTunes or other pod apps. It helps people find the show. You can connect with us on Twitter at WT Force Show, at What the Force Podcast on Facebook, or on our website at whattheforce.ca. Feel free to reach out to us and start a conversation. Cheers.